Welcome to the Europe Conversation. My guest this week is the EU Commissioner for Climate, Clean Growth and Net Zero, Wopke Hoekstra. He says that while global warming is a man-made problem, the response has to be balanced with the interests of industry. Well, Wopke Hoekstra, EU Commissioner for Climate and Clean Growth, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you for having me.
We're here because a few days ago the EU announced its targets for 2040 by cutting greenhouse emissions by 90%. Can you tell us, do you think that the EU can actually do that, given that so many member states, in particular France, are looking for flexibilities?
I think we can, and I think we should, if we manage to make sure this is a huge opportunity also for our businesses. By the way, that is precisely what France and others are asking for, and rightly so. This is not just about climate, it is as much about exposing us to future economic success and making sure we create more independence and never again become dependent on rogue states like Russia for something as important as our energy.
And then one of the issues, one of the flexibilities, which is sort of people are talking about the most, is this idea of a carbon credit, where other countries, the EU pays other countries to cut their carbon emissions. There are real concerns about this around accountability, whether it'll work, whether it's cost effective, whether we're not redirecting money in the EU, which could be invested in the EU's own carbon emission reduction schemes.
Yeah, but let's be clear-eyed about what we're doing. The vast amount of effort and also money will be spent on clean tech, will be spent on batteries, on solar, on wind, on geothermal, all sorts of technologies that will help push for more economic growth and more jobs in Europe. That's one. Secondly, and next to that, if it is more cost-effective for our own companies to make sure that they go for part of the solution and part of the emission reductions outside of Europe, this is exactly what is opening the door for getting that. So it's not going to be mandatory, and companies will only go there if it is cost effective.
Even the EU, the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change, has advised against this, and also saying that those countries, that often developing countries, won't meet their climate targets under the Paris Accord because of this.
Well, I think actually it's something different, and also the advisory board, the scientists are telling us something different. They in itself like the idea of carbon credits and doing exactly this. They're just saying it should not be part of the 90%, it should be on top of it. So that I think is an extremely important distinction. Secondly, in this hugely complicated geopolitical world, there is a lot of value also for us in building more bridges with our friends in Africa and Latin America and other places. And this is something they're advocating for. This is something they like. They often lack the capital, they often lack the opportunity. Wouldn't it be great if our companies actually build these bridges, make money, and manage this problem and help to basically drive down emissions at the same time?
But is it not the case, though, those countries, their economic growth may be slowed because they have to take into account their own carbon emissions as well as the ones they're receiving money for from the European Union, whereas the EU can then just pursue economic growth without impeded?
So the presumption that underlies your question suggests actually that there is some sort of a discrepancy between on the one hand economic growth and on the other hand climate action. And our job is to make sure that we continue with climate action, but do so in a way that works for our people, works for our companies, and works for our economy. Personally, I think that is very much doable. But we need to make sure that on top of this, setting this target, we have the conversation about how European companies are going to be the winners of the future in clean tech, how we are much stricter about a level playing field that is fair to our companies rather than that they face unfair competition, particularly from China. How do we make sure we make life much simpler for our businesses? Because frankly speaking, we have made it too complicated.
I suppose just one of the issues around this is that there's an anxiety that this is just another element of the chipping away at the Green Deal. I mean, we look at the Commission, for example, well, potentially getting rid of, I don't know if it is or not, the corporate greenwashing legislation. I mean, what is the position on that?
Let's look into this specific proposal and what it is. On the one hand, it is clearly ambitious because of the true north it sets in terms of action. That helps, by the way, also for our companies because it gives predictability on where the European Union wants to go. And indeed, it offers flexibility and I would say pragmatism in part of the design.
Another part of it as well is the legislation around deforestation, the nature restoration law. It's something that the EPP, your own political grouping again, was heralding as one of the most important pieces of the Green Deal and then wanted to reject and end. Can you understand why people are anxious about this direction?
Again, what we need to make sure is that we become less one-dimensional in the whole conversation about climate and about all the topics related to this. We need to go all in the domain of decarbonization. And we need to do so for reasons of climate change, for reasons of industrial survival and success, and for reasons of independence. And if we are able to find that nexus of climate action, clean technology and industrial growth, I am very sure that we have a recipe that will work for everyone in the European Union.
But just specifically, can you understand why people are anxious that 1 minute we have this Green Deal when we have a biodiversity collapse at the moment, and then the EPP saying, actually, let's scrap that. And then similarly with deforestation and similarly with this.
Let's take stock of the fact that this is the largest transition in energy that we have seen in more than 100 years. Our true north is clear. It is absolutely clear where we want to go. It is also smart to be flexible on the how, to be pragmatic and look at what works. If it doesn't work, you would need to course correct. And I think it is much smarter. And our citizens understand to then do that than just, continue with something that apparently didn't work.
So with nature restoration, what would be the alternative? Because when you're looking at literally a biodiversity collapse.
What we need to build, in my view, is a system where taking care of our forests also works economically, where there is a business case also for all the foresters that are doing a great job. That has all sorts of consequences for the longevity of certain trees. That has all sorts of consequences for the biodiversity in our forests. That's not easy, certainly not with the state in which our forests are today, but I think we can do better.
You've said in the past a few times that you don't see global warming as a political issue. It shouldn't be, at least. But obviously it is, because you look at the European Parliament that has moved very much to the right, even the EPP when it comes to the climate issue. Some member states, the likes of the Prime Minister of Italy, saying, it's ideological, the issue of global warming.
So first, just to be crystal clear, the problem of climate change is there. It is man-made, and it will become worse before it gets better, particularly in Europe. The world is warming up roughly with 1.5 degrees by now. Europe is at twice that number. We're talking about 3 degrees. The impact on our societies, on our people, on our businesses, on our communities, in terms of floods, in terms of wildfires, is very, very significant. On top of that, the economic impact is easily between 50 and 100 billion, and that number will only go up. So there is a clear imperative, and in my view also a responsibility for politicians to make sure our people are not in harm's way and we do something about it.
What about the fact that the United States is also off the pitch when it comes to the fight against global warming? One of the first things obviously Donald Trump did was to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, and we see the policies enacted.
Well, that is clearly deeply unfortunate and a major blow to international efforts. Earlier on in the interview, I was saying that climate change doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter for the heating up of the planet where CO2 is being pumped into the air. And if then the second largest emitter, the most formidable power across the globe in geopolitical terms, and the largest economy basically says, well, thanks but no thanks, we no longer play ball, that is of course something that has very significant consequences. At the same time, my read is that you will see in the US that whenever an investment in, for example, clean tech pays off, and as a side effect is also something that is good for climate, businesses are not going to stop it.
Yeah, do you think that could be an upshot for the European Union? Because we saw the likes of Draghi and others have said that innovation can't thrive in the European Union, but it can do in the United States. But maybe do you think that the EU could make an effort to try to bring a lot of that back, a specific effort, not just a sort of an accidental one where they decide themselves?
Our quest for innovation, our objective is much more fundamental, and we need to reshape the landscape in such a way that innovation can flourish across Europe. And that will take huge steps in terms of the Capital Markets Union. That will take way more investments from businesses and governments alike in tech and in AI. That also will take simplification. And by the way, as I said before, making sure there is a level playing field where our companies face competition, but fair competition and not heavily state-subsidized competition from China.
Is the EU about to meet that moment? I mean, look,
absolutely, absolutely. But the one thing I will say is we will need considerable speed going forward, and that is exactly what this Commission seeks to deliver. And
final question: the EU is obviously pursuing trade across the world outside the United States because of the ongoing trade war. But in the past, the EU has said that any new trade agreements will have to have very strong stipulations about protecting the environment and so on. Do you think that those might fall by the wayside in pursuit of trade deals to ensure that we have proper economic growth?
No, I don't. And Mercosur is one of the great examples of that. That's exactly the type of deal that we seek. It opens up a huge market for our companies. By the way, it is also hugely attractive for our friends in Latin America, and it has clear prerequisites also in the domain of climate and of the environment.
But the farmers who are in government in the Netherlands, who are obviously in the government has collapsed, but they're still in a government there, they are not happy with Mercosur.
I have a different read, and if you would ask also the Agri Commissioner, Hansen, he will be the first to articulate to you that particularly also for our own sector, there is a huge opportunity. That on top of that, he has been, and the Commission has been taking mitigating measures to make sure it is fair for everyone. And that is also the reason why, at least in my read, this is so broadly supported across member states.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us
on
your conversation.
Thank you.